The story I'm about to tell weaves itself through dualities of self and other, of earth and alien, of past and future, of here and there, and most definitely of truth and fiction. Many of you may relate to my story and perhaps will discover yourself to be nostalgic when my speculations about sanity weave a path in your mind. Is the core of my story true? Am I making it up? Is the mystic vision, which is the singular subject of this non-dual prose poem and truth fiction, a sign of spiritual progress or of neurological decay? As experiencers of the phenomenon, you already know about the dualities I mentioned. You wouldn't identify yourself with such a vague phrase unless the reality of the experience has demonstrated itself to you both in your rational and irrational minds. However, you're seeking for something particular, perhaps hoping to make sense of your own experience, perhaps hoping to connect with another who has seen what you have seen, or perhaps to connect with those who have eyes like yours that can see in the special way that makes you unique. This is my claim. I have seen the truth behind screen memories in physical form 3 times. I have seen that which is unseeable. The complexity of vision inspires a complexity of thought that makes me yearn for the simple time that I wondered if I was an alien abductee. Perhaps the mysterious scar, the nosebleeds, the headaches, the strange dreams, and the stranger fears meant that space aliens stole my body using beams of light. Even though I saw the full truth of the eternal visitor emerge into our world wearing a garment of light so full that it was empty. The first time I saw this non-being that brought the many dimensions into a single point, it was kind to me, to my 3-year-old self, and took on a form that I could understand back then, the Easter Bunny. Experience, true experience, happens before understanding and perhaps perception, at least if consciousness is truly primary. The second time I saw this being, it made an appointment with me in my calendar to demonstrate how little I understood and how little I was in control. The second time frightened me to my core and taught me about repression. Would you believe the phenomenon makes me sweat and nervous? I've sat with dozens of people who share their stories, dreams, and experiences. Their visitors sometimes visit me to demonstrate the reality of their stories. I have seen my clients approach existential fear of the unknown, of the wildly powerful, and of the others. They emerge from hypnosis integrated with the truth of who they are and the connectedness of the phenomena, which blesses and teaches me on this strange journey. I know that there is good reason for hope because my clients have intimately shown me what will come, but I'm still scared of leaning into the truth of the other's power. You probably want the gritty details of the encounter, but I know you'll think it's just a brain tumor, wishful thinking, or some other psychological dynamic. I thought that too for a while. I still do, but the other insists that its presence become more known through testimony. When the Shining One visited me a second time, I was obsessed with UFO footage. I knew that the others could manifest through UAP and knew that the movements and pulsations of orbs might be direct communication with non-human intelligence. Someone sent me a video of UAPs in the daytime sky and asked for analysis, or perhaps I just found it online. The video, to my eyes, was obviously flares and not UAP. I knew because the Phoenix lights, as filmed by Tom King, were said to be flares but lacked all the characteristics of flares, like smoke trails, flickering of lights, and movement in space. These UAPs had smoke trails, flickered like flares, and exhibited movement in space. However, the UAPs were not as interesting as what happened next, which was completely mundane and quite impossible. Right as I decided to ignore the flares, an ant climbed up to my computer screen, circled the video, then crawled to the browser tab that held my calendar. When I opened my calendar, the ant crawled down to a free time slot and stayed there until I scheduled time under the event name Shimmers to remind myself to look at the footage. Having accomplished its task, it climbed off my screen and out of my life. Even though a magical ant had scheduled time with me to review UAP footage, I completely forgot about the appointment and took a shower. The next part will sound extremely crazy unless I prepare you with some knowledge, and then it will sound only normal crazy. It turns out that if you look at yourself in the mirror with dim light, you will see visual hallucinations similar to psychedelics or telepathy tests. My brother told me about the experiment when he was an undergraduate studying neuroscience. I tried it way back then, and it was frightening, but I made a practice of it because I thought it would help me deal with my nightmares, bad trips, and sleep paralysis demons. I haven't practiced it for years, but I still think about it. When I got out of the shower, I looked at myself in the mirror. As soon as I caught my own eyes, I saw a face looking back at me that was half human and half tall gray alien. It appeared in the same way as the hallucinations, but it was fully formed. Most of the time, it took up to 5 minutes of mindful presence before my face would stretch itself into monstrous versions of itself. Here was a full-blown mirror hallucination, fully formed and looking back at me. My past practice paid off, and I continued to gaze into the alien eyes looking back at me. Despite the suddenness of the alien appearance, I examined the face and noticed something quite interesting. Its face, its eyes, and its beingness were shrouded in shimmers that I physically saw, which disturbed me so much that I fled the bathroom in a panic. The whole experience was complex, and I'd like to break it down before we continue. At the physical level, I saw myself in the mirror. Blue light from the clear sky filtered through the opaque window and landed on my glistening cheek, which created a calico-like pattern of yellow indoor light and blue outdoor light that my brain interpreted as a hybridization of gray alien and human faces. The hallucination of the gray was very strong and sustained by what I might call a spirit guide or something like that. I'm no stranger to psychic phenomena, even though I'm not particularly talented or disciplined. I'm just psychic enough to be helped by the other side, and I know when I'm doing something and when they are. In this way, the psychic vision was not a personal fantasy. Rather, it was a communication from a real other who had the power to sustain the vision in our shared psychic world. While some psychic visions, primarily through my own power, appear flimsy and flexible to the imagination, this psychic vision was solid and not from my own power. I'm sure many experiencers of the phenomenon may relate. On top of the real physical and psychic visions, I saw something that was not there. Nothing. Or perhaps everything. It was a shimmer like the shimmer I saw as a kid. But it wasn't out there. It was in my head, and therefore everywhere I looked. And this is where language breaks down, and rational thought. All I could think was, oh my god, this is a brain tumor. This is a brain tumor. Oh, maybe it's just an eye tumor. I breathed like the Buddhist taught me, and still I freaked out. Then the phone chimed. It reminded me that I had an appointment with Shimmers at this very time. That's when I found out that others have a sense of humor and perhaps irony. It taught me to identify true UAPs from merely unidentified objects with other techniques than video analysis. The third time I saw the truth of the unveiled phenomena happened just a few days ago, and I didn't realize it until I reflected on the strange consultation I had immediately after the encounter. All consultations are strange about missing time regression. All my encounters this year have humbled me and revealed to me that my ability to hear guidance surpasses my intelligence and knowledge. The actual events of the encounter are underwhelming, just an inner experience and some thoughts. That's it. However, where it happened and how it happened are interesting to me, and they might be interesting to you, but we have to build up the context. The problem with most contact stories is that they are really meaningful to the person who had them, but not so meaningful to their audience. Contact speaks through personal associations, just like dreams, which we often call synchronicities because the inner and outer worlds synchronize just for that moment. Let me try to convey the context. I'm a hypnotist, a dream worker, and a PhD student focused on non-human intelligence contact and dreams. Earlier this year, I went through a crisis of faith because I became aware of the risk of false memories in hypnosis. I knew about it before, but I thought I could tell the difference, or it didn't matter. After all, my intuition has always guided me to offer hypnosis as primarily dream work, and I have elevated the ethics and epistemology of dream work in my terms of service above those of hypnosis. Actually, what happened is that I accidentally induced a false memory about watching Johnny Mack, the famous alien abduction researcher, on Oprah in the third week of March 2024 that caused my crisis of faith. The crisis was so bad that I stopped believing in my own practice, and I needed to move my family into my in-laws' basement to gather myself without the burden of rent. I also went on a leave of absence from my PhD program to engage in ethical self-inquiry about the topic, as well as to evaluate the ethical oversight the Institute could offer. Anyways, my life more or less fell apart, and I'm putting it back together now. I'm working in my in-laws' furnace room, next to all the appliances and a drain on the floor. My wife calls it the portal to the underworld, which is quite fitting for where I am in my career and what I have chosen to do. This is getting back to the third time I saw naked hyperspace in my physical vision, although I was finally able to discern that the other was not seen through my physical eyes. So perhaps the tumor is in the brain and not the eyes. My scared intellect protests. This is getting back to the third time I saw naked hyperspace in my physical vision, although I was finally able to discern that the other was not seen through my physical eyes. So perhaps the tumor is in the brain and not my eyes. My scared intellect protests. As I walked into my underworldly office, I passed through a pressure barrier of sorts. It felt like popping your ears on an airplane, maybe like swimming up from water into air. It felt like the reverse of a boundary I passed through when I left the domain of my missing time experience from my encounter in my early 20s, which I will not recount here. I recognized the other immediately, but started to fear it really was a tumor. I could see the world and could see many dimensions at once. I once smoked DMT, which felt like a mirror inversion of this experience. On DMT, I was aware of my body and my embodied perceptions, at the same time as being aware of a space or multiple spaces that contextualize my embodied space through the other dimensions. The DMT opened my crown chakra to that world, and I moved back and forth between time and space forever during those 5 minutes or so. This third other was like a pinpoint, pressed into my field of vision. I could see it and not see it at the same time. My body was freaked out because I knew that the tumor came back and I would have to explain what was happening to my wife to take me to the hospital. I wanted it to go away. I didn't know what to do. So I followed my course of habit. I sat down, I opened the computer, and I fired up a few tabs, but I couldn't focus enough to read, although that probably would have been possible despite the celestial shimmering from everywhere centralized on that point. Maybe it's relevant. My dad once reported being mystically connected to all that is after an AA meeting, like a Buddha, and he tried going grocery shopping to see if normal life was possible while enlightened, which it was. In the furnace room, I remembered the time that the visitor had scheduled its visit, but I could not connect with it as an honored guest. I was too afraid that my retinas were burned away or that there was a tumor in my optic nerves or whatever. I tried to diagnose myself with a sort of morbid curiosity. Does the vision still happen when I close one eye? What about when I press on my eyeballs? How about when I spin my eyes around my head? What could cause this? How much can I see through or in or with the singular shimmer? By the way, I now call it the Aleph after the Borges story of the same name. I eventually gave up trying to diagnose myself and ended up in mindfulness meditation, just being with sensation and the breath as thoughts arise. I turned away from the computer and towards the water heater next to me. The Aleph overlapped with the water heater's warning that informed me that hot water could burn me, which I think is a message, but I haven't figured it out quite yet. The Aleph has several interesting properties. It was eternally stable, yet appeared in front of me. As I moved my head around, hoping that it would trigger a sense of perspective, I realized that the Aleph was in the center of my being. Memory is a funny thing because I now remember an observation that happened later, which is the awareness of it leaving me. Afterwards, I felt empty, sort of like feeling a healthy void after a bowel movement. When I looked back at the moment that I observed the Aleph, I think of its absence and my physical relief centered on my pineal gland in the middle of my brain. Consequently, I remember feeling its presence in my head, like the feeling of someone staring at you, only rolled up into a ball and placed in the center of your head. As I moved my perspective, not with my head but with my heart, I noticed that this shimmer shifted and moved. It is now clear to me that we formed a pinhole camera of the soul. I stayed in meditation until life called me away, probably something to do with my kids. I can't remember now. I would have pushed this memory away the moment it happened, if not for the consultation. Experiencers often push away memories because it's not the right time to integrate them. The memories seem to be woven in such a way to leave a lingering thread that you can pull whenever you want to unravel reality. A question from my consultation was the lingering thread. I have been pulling on it since Monday. By the way, I'm writing this piece an hour before the session, which seemed important to me this morning when I got the idea to write a narrative retelling my encounters with a preface in a style that declares the writing to be possibly fact or fiction, much like Borges, who clearly wrote true fiction. The consultation was strange because the client asked me all sorts of questions for the first half of it, which is the opposite of the normal flow. Usually I ask a few questions and the client tells me the story that's bottled up inside and asks questions if hypnosis or dream work could possibly provide resolution to the emotional tensions built up around the memory or intuition. This client, however, methodically asked me about my encounters. We discussed screen memories and I shared my experience with a visitor who was shimmering and became the Easter Bunny. We speculated that entities or UAPs are from a different dimensional space. Their visitation might open a door to hyperspace that you could see through if you were paying attention or if they let you. My client asked a couple of times if I had seen hyperspace again since the Easter Bunny. I said no each time, but the question stayed with me. It felt weird and out of place. It felt like one of the many strange omens I've received from the many strange guides and visitors of my clients. It was the dangling thread of my encounter, which I would have pushed away from my memory had their questions felt less ominous to me. I was gently pulling on the thread this morning as I walked and thought, this reminds me of that Borges story about the Aleph. Perhaps I'll write a little narrative like that is hard to tell where truth begins and wisdom ends. So perhaps you'll find validation of your own story in mine. Perhaps you'll find the detail you need to complete your own theory of hyperspace. Perhaps one of you is a neurologist and can read the signs. There's actually no truth in this piece for you. Even though all of it might be true, only you can say. The tall gray, who I now perceive through my imagination, invites me to see the Aleph as a literary metaphor for the connection each of us has to our higher selves, to God, to eternity, to the universe, or whatever you call it, which is why I believe the Aleph that I saw in the furnace room is actually a false Aleph.